Module 8, Frequently Asked Questions About Psychology. So we've reflected on how scientific approach can restrain biases, and we've seen how case studies, naturalistic observations, and surveys can help us describe behavior. We've noted that correlational studies assess the association between two variables and indicate how well one predicts the other. And we've examined logic that underlies experiments, control conditions, random assignment of participants, independent variables and dependent variables, and we've considered how statistical tools can help us see and interpret the world around us. Yet even knowing this much, you might still have some questions about psychology. Module 8 is an attempt to get to the frequently asked questions about psychology. Psychology applied. Can laboratory experiments really illuminate everyday life? So when you see and hear about psychological research, do you ever wonder whether people's behavior in a lab really does predict their behavior in real life? For example, does detecting a blink of a faint red light in a dark room have anything useful to say about flying a plane at night? If, after playing violent video games in the lab, do teens actually become more willing to push buttons that they think electrically shock someone else? And does that indicate that the playing shooter games make someone more likely to commit violence in everyday life? Before you answer, consider the experimenter intends for the lab environment to be a simplified reality, one that simulates and controls important features of everyday life. Like a wind tunnel lets airplane designers recreate airflow under controlled conditions. The laboratory experiment lets psychologists recreate forces under controlled conditions as well. As experiment's purpose is not to recreate exact behaviors of everyday life, but to test theoretical principles. So for example, in aggression studies, deciding whether to push a button that delivers a shock may not be the same thing as slapping someone in the face, but the principle's the same. And it is the resulting principles, not the specific findings, that help us explain everyday behaviors. So the point to remember, psychological science focused less on particular behaviors than on seeking general principles that help explain many behaviors. And although psychological principles might help predict behaviors for groups of people, they minimally predict behavior for an individual person. Does behavior depend on one's culture and gender? Well, what can psychological studies done in one time and place tell you about people? Often with people from what researchers called weird, the weird cultures, which, hang on just a second, I'm going to bring up my little weird animation there. Weird is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, which tends to be the countries that get research done. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic cultures. What can that really tell us about people in general? As we will see time again, culture, shared ideas and behaviors that one generation passes on to the next matters. Our culture shapes our behavior. It influences our standards of promptness, our frankness, our attitudes toward premarital sex in varying body shapes, our tendency to be casual or formal, our willingness to make eye contact, our conversational distance, and much, much more. But collectivist cultures, for example, emphasizing group goals and individual cultures that put priority on individual goals can demonstrate cultural differences. Being aware of these differences can restrain our assumptions that others will think and act as we do. It's also true, however, that we are shared biological beings, and there are many things that unite us and are universal with regards to just kind of being part of a human family. People diagnosed with specific learning disorders exhibit the same brain malfunction whether they are Italian or French or British, for example. Variations in languages might impede communication across cultures, but all languages share deep principles of grammar, and people from opposite hemispheres can often communicate with simple gestures like smiles and frowns. People in different cultures vary in feelings of loneliness, but across cultures, loneliness is magnified by shyness, low self-esteem, or being unmarried. So there are similarities that we can play upon. Gender, though, matters too. Researchers report gender differences in what we dream, how we express and detect emotions, in our risk for alcohol use, disorders like depression and eating disorders, for example. Gender differences fascinate us, and studying them is potentially very beneficial. For example, many researchers believe that women carry on conversations more readily to build relationships, while men talk more to give information and advice. Knowing this difference can help us prevent conflicts and misunderstandings in everyday relationships. Ethics in research. Why do psychologists study animals, and is it ethical to experiment on animals? Many psychologists study animals because they find them fascinating and they want to understand how different species learn, think, and behave. Psychologists also study animals to learn about people. We humans are not like animals. We are animals, sharing a common biology. Animal experiments have therefore led to treatments for human diseases, insulin for diabetes, vaccines to prevent polio and rabies, transplants to replace different defective organs. Humans are complex, but the same processes by which we learn are present in rats and monkeys and even sea slugs. The simplicity of the sea slug's nervous system is precisely what makes it so revealing of the neural mechanisms of learning. Sharing such similarities, should we not respect our animal relatives? We cannot defend our scientific work with animals on the basis of similarities between them and ourselves, and then defend it morally on the basis of differences, noted Roger Ulrich. The animal protection movement protests the use of animals in psychological, biological, and medical research. Researchers remind us that animals used worldwide each year in research are but a fraction of the 1% of the billion of animals killed annually for food. And yearly, every dog or cat used in an experiment and cared for under humane regulations, for every one of those, 50 others are killed in humane animal shelters. Some animal protection organizations want to replace experiments on animals with naturalistic observation. Many animal researchers respond that this is not a question of good versus evil, but compassion for animals versus compassion for people. How many of us would have attacked Louis Pasteur's experiments with rabies, which caused some dogs to suffer, but led to a vaccine that spared millions of people and dogs from agonizing deaths? And would we really wish to have deprived ourselves of the animal research that led to effective methods for training children with mental disorders, of understanding aging, of relieving fears and depression? The answer to such questions vary by culture, but in Gallup surveys in Canada and the United States, about 60% of adults deem medical testing on animals as morally acceptable. In Britain, only about 37% do. Out of this heated debate, two issues emerge. The basic one is whether it's right to place the well-being of the humans above that of animals. In experiments on stress and cancer, is it right to think that mice get tumors in the hope that people might not? Should some monkeys be exposed to HIV-like virus in search of an AIDS vaccine? Is our use and consumption of other animals as natural as the behavior of carnivorous hawks, cats, and whales? Defenders of research on animals argue that anyone who's eaten a hamburger, worn leather shoes, tolerated hunting and fishing, or supported the extermination of crop-destroying or plague-carrying pests has already agreed that yes, it's sometimes permissible to sacrifice animals for the sake of human well-being. If we give the human life first priority, what safeguards should protect the well-being of animals in research? One survey of animal researchers gave an answer. Some 98% supported government regulations protecting primates, dogs, cats, and 74% supported regulations providing for the humane care of rats and mice. Many professional associations and funding agencies have already created such guidelines. Animals themselves have benefited in some cases from animal research. One Ohio team of research psychologists measured stress hormone levels in samples of millions of dogs brought each year to animal shelters, and they devised handling and stroking methods to reduce stress and ease the dogs' transition to adoptive homes. Other studies have helped improve the care and management of animals' natural habitats by revealing behavioral kinships with animals and the remarkable intelligence of chimpanzees, gorillas, and other animals. Experiments have also led to increased empathy and protection for them, At its best, a psychology concerned for humans and sensitive to animals serves the welfare of both. Lastly, what ethical guidelines safeguard human participants? Does the image of white-coated scientists delivering electric shocks trouble you? If so, you'll be relieved to know that most psychological studies are free of such stress today. With people blinking lights, flashing words, and pleasant social interactions that are far more common in psychological experiments today. Moreover, psychology's experiments are mild compared with the stress and humiliation often inflicted by reality TV shows, for example. In one episode, The Bachelor, a man dumped his new fiancée on camera at the producer's request for the woman who earlier had finished second. Occasionally, though, researchers do temporarily stress or deceive people when they believe it is essential to a justifiable end, such as understanding and controlling violent behavior or studying mood swings. Some experiments won't work if participants know everything beforehand, or even much beforehand. Wanting to be helpful, the participants might try to confirm the researchers' predictions, which would be kind of human nature. Ethical principles developed by the American Psychological Association in 2010 and by the British Psychological Society in 2009 and by psychologists internationally in 2004 urge researchers to: Number 1, obtain participants' informed consent. To protect them from physical and emotional harm and discomfort. To keep information about individual participants confidential. And fully debrief people, explain the research afterward. Moreover, most universities, where a great deal of research is conducted, now have ethics committees, an institutional review board that screens research proposals and safeguards participants' well-being. The ideal is for the researcher to be sufficiently informative and considerate so the participants will leave feeling at least as good about themselves as when they came in. Better yet, they should be repaid by having learned something. Is psychology free of value judgments? Psychology is definitely not value-free. Values affect what we study, how we study it, and how we interpret results. Researchers' values influence their choice of topics. Should we study worker productivity or worker morale, sex discrimination or gender differences, conformity or independence? Values can also color the facts. As we noted earlier, our preconceptions can bias our observations and interpretations. Sometimes we see what we want or what we expect. Even the words we use to describe something can reflect our values. In psychology and in everyday speech, labels describe and labels evaluate. One person's rigidity is another person's consistency. One person's faith is another's fanaticism. One country's enhanced interrogation techniques, such as cold water immersion, become torture when practiced by its enemies. Our labeling someone as firm or stubborn, careful or picky, discreet or secretive reveals our own attitudes. Popular applications of psychology also contain hidden values. If you defer to professional guidance about how to live, how to raise children, how to achieve self-fulfillment, what to do with sexual feelings, how to get ahead at work, you're accepting a value-laden advice. A science of behavior and mental processes can help us reach our goals, but it can't decide what the goals shall be. If some people see psychology as merely common sense, others have a different concern. That is becoming dangerously powerful. Is it an accident that astronomy is the oldest science and psychology the youngest? To some, exploring the external universe seems far safer than exploring our own inner universe. Might psychology, they ask, be used to manipulate people? Knowledge, like all power, can be used for good and evil. Nuclear power has both lit up cities and demolished them. Persuasive power has been used to educate people and to deceive them. Although psychology does indeed have the power to deceive, its purpose is to enlighten. Everyday psychologists are exploring ways to enhance learning, creativity, and compassion. Psychology speaks to many of our world's great problems: war, overpopulation, prejudice, family crises, and crime, all of which involve attitudes and behaviors. But psychology also speaks to our deepest longings for nourishment, for love, and for happiness. Psychology cannot address all of life's